Hello everybody, Mark Schaffline with you, and this is the Schaffline Report, Tuesday's edition. We're broadcasting from beautiful Irvine, California today, and folks, we have a very special guest on the show today. I'd like to welcome Matt Gunderson to the show. Matt, happy to have you on today. You're running for State Senate 38th District here in Southern California. And folks, Matt was recruited by some of the top Republicans in Orange County for this position. He is a successful businessman, has a family of 4 daughters that he's raised. Matt, welcome to the show. Happy to have you here.
Absolutely, Mark. Thanks for having me here today. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, me too. Hey, listen, give the audience a little background about yourself, how you were brought up, how your business, and what led you to where you are today.
All right. As you said, I was recruited into running for the state senate. I've been a businessman in South Orange County for 22 years, and we sold our businesses last March. And right away in April, I started getting the knock on the door and the telephone calls from the likes of the incumbent state senator Pat Bates and former Congresswoman Mimi Walters and others who said, "What are you going to do now, Matt? Because we think you should look at this state senate seat." And as the conversation went on throughout the summer, it pretty much was clear to us, my wife and I and our family, that unlike most people in California who sell their businesses, we're not leaving this state, we're staying. 2 of our daughters are still in high school. So it was, at the end of the day, a decision between sitting on the sidelines and continuing to complain about California or jumping into the fray and trying to make a little bit of a difference.
Wow, that's a great story. And Matt, when they were recruiting you, tell us a little bit about what that process was like, because obviously you were a successful business person. You didn't wake up out of bed one day and say, "I want to be a state senator." Talk to our audience a little bit about how it happened.
I've always been supportive of Republican candidates in South Orange County and even across the state, and I've been a donor and a moderate volunteer, but certainly not a political activist. But I think that they looked at me and said, "Hey, here's a person of integrity and character with real business sense and a commitment to the state of California, and certainly a commitment to the concept of family." And so they tapped me on the shoulders, and it's not completely foreign to me. I grew up in a small town in west central Wisconsin, 7th of 8 kids, in a family that was pretty active in the community. My father was on the school board, my mother was on the church council, and even my oldest brother was in the state assembly and then subsequently ran for the U.S. Congress and was elected from Wisconsin from 1980 to 1996. So politics isn't foreign to me, but I never thought that after we sold our businesses that my first step into another activity would be politics. But here I am.
But you got some political background in your immediate family too. Done your wife's side of the family?
Yes.
Talk a little bit about that, man.
People always ask me if my wife is bought into this, is your family on board? And I tell them my wife was an easier yes than it was for me. For me, it was all about the opportunity cost. What are my other options to be of service? And for my wife, her father was the minority leader in the state assembly and a state senator here in California as she was growing up, Dave Cox, and he has passed away, but he set a legacy and set an example of public service that she really reveres, and she saw the value that public service brings if it's well directed, so to speak, and her dad set that standard, and so hopefully I can carry on that legacy.
Matt, let's talk about this because this is a really key point, and our audience is going to be aware of this. California State Senate, the Democratic Party currently has a supermajority.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about that and the dynamics of coming in and.
Yeah, there's 40 state Senate seats in the state of California, and only 9 of them are held by Republicans. And so that makes this seat and holding this seat significantly important. And the redistricting in this process in this last cycle took this seat from a +1 Republican seat to a plus almost 5 Democratic seat. And I like to say that the redistricting commission is supposed to be independent, but it's not that independent. But as we were making this decision and people asked me about what the district's going to look like, I said, if they make it more Democratic, it just means we're going to have to work harder. Because it's important to keep this seat, red. The Democrats in Sacramento have decided that this is one of their top 2 targets to flip from red to blue. And, if they do that, it digs us deeper into the super minority status, and that's a huge problem because Sacramento needs conversation, and they need a check and balance in a two-party system. And I've even reached across the aisle to my Democratic friends and said, hey, we don't agree on everything, but I think we can agree on one thing, and that is that single-party rule is destroying this state. And we need to have that check and balance in Sacramento where Republicans have a place at the table and have a part of the conversation. And so between this cycle and the next election cycle, there's some optimistic desire and belief that we could get ourselves, at least in the state Senate, out of that super minority.
Well, that would be great if that happened. And when the last election happened, I think, if my memory recalls, 53-47 Republican in the last...
in this seat, correct.
And prior to when they made the adjustments.
Right, and because we lost a little bit of Orange County and gained a little bit of San Diego County, which has now switched this seat from being a Republican seat to a Democratic seat.
So from a national political perspective, we often quote the Cook Political Report. This seat it's a winnable seat. I mean, it would be probably rated toss-up if it was we were using political...
Yeah, and I think the political winds are in our favor in this cycle, particularly because the national mood, the leadership of the Democratic establishment in Washington, D.C., and the mood of the country. But the issues are also Republican issues, play into whether it's affordability and taxation and regulation, whether it's homelessness, crime, even education has been served up to Republicans in this cycle. And, so we're encouraged and cautiously optimistic, and I joke about it, but having sold our business, I'm the unemployed candidate, so this is my full-time job. And, the Republicans in the audience, you have my commitment that I'm going to work full-time to keep this seat in Republican hands.
Let's talk about some of those issues, Matt. I think the biggest thing I hear from traveling around the state of California, affordability and taxes seem to be up near the top. There's others we'll talk about, but really dive into those two things because that seems on people's mind. And now with gas prices spiking almost, in some cases in Southern California, $6 a gallon, housing cost escalating. Man, people are concerned about these
Absolutely.
issues.
And, affordability and cost of living in California is a direct result of overtaxation and overregulation here. It drives the costs of everything up. And, I tell people in California, we have three groups of people. We have the people who are leaving California, the people who are thinking about leaving California, and the people who are watching their children and grandchildren have to leave California. And that's not sustainable. Right. And, we sit in Sacramento with a ridiculously large surplus, and the Democrats' answer is, well, what else can we spend money on? And, the Republican perspective should be like, okay, let's first of all give some of this back. Let's take a gas tax holiday right now. And people say, well, it won't make a big difference. $1 a gallon makes a big difference to the middle class driver in California. Absolutely. So for them to say it doesn't make a difference is a joke. But also, we have to figure out how to just simply get our taxation and regulation levels realistic.
When you go up there, even if you win, you're going to be in a minority, but maybe not as big a minority. It sounds like, Matt, part of your goal is, look, I'm a pragmatist. I can make things happen. I've run businesses. I mean, when you ran a business, it didn't matter whether that customer was a Republican or a Democrat. It was your customer. And you wanted to figure out a way to solve, their issues.
What brought me to California was the opportunity to get an Open Point automobile dealership in Mission Viejo. And we took that Open Point, and then we've subsequently added an Open Point Audi dealership and an Open Point Volvo dealership as well. And I always tell people, this Open Point concept simply means you've got the right to sell this car, but you don't really have a business. You have to come out here and build a business. And I always make it clear to people that when I came to California, I didn't come here and buy a business. I came here and built a business, and I built 3 of them. And because of that experience over the course of 20 plus years and creating 185 jobs in South Orange County, like I've endured everything there is that a small business owner can endure from Sacramento down, from the redevelopment process, the construction process, wage and hour employment law, environmental regulation, you name it, I've lived it. And I think that gives me an opportunity to go to Sacramento and have a conversation with them about the real world applicability of what they're trying to push down and into the general public and on business owners. And, unfortunately, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and say a lot of what they're trying to accomplish has good intentions, but their well-intended legislation often ends up with some really bad unintended consequences. And right now we're seeing it play out in just the huge issue with affordability and cost of living in California.
Yeah, and in your district, you have a diversified district. I mean, it starts in South County and Orange County, goes all the way down, I think, to Mission Beach in just north of San Diego. So talk a little bit about the affordability in your district, because in some places they're very wealthy and other places it's just downright expensive, but not uber expensive.
Exactly. This district, runs from Mission Beach all the way up along the San Diego County coastline up into Orange County and then into a swath of Orange County. And it is diverse in the sense that there's a huge middle class population, but there's an ethnic population, and there's also the coastal uber wealthy. And, California is rapidly moving into a world where we are only accessible to the uber wealthy and the poor. And that's not sustainable. No. So until we address the challenges that middle class Californians have in living and getting through their week from paycheck to paycheck, we're not going to survive as a state. I mean, I can't tell you how many friends we have from Ladera Ranch who, after their youngest child graduates from high school, leave the state.
Wow, that's not good.
Tennessee, Texas, Arizona, the Carolinas, the mass exodus of California's middle class is eventually going to bankrupt this state.
Well, and you have a situation right now, Matt, where beside these real estate prices, and it's not just California's fault, some of that came from the Federal Reserve buying bonds way more than they probably should have, the excessive government spending. Some of that can't be controlled on a state level, but as it filters down, politicians in Sacramento have to deal with this, because now you have too much money chasing too few goods, a la housing prices really going up. We've had now, folks, the spike in energy prices where, again, we said on the show yesterday, I paid $5.69 a gallon yesterday, and that may be cheap by the end of the week, the way the gas prices are going. But, Matt, it sounds like you want to get to Sacramento and establish from a sort of a pragmatic approach of what we can do, what the government can do helping its citizens, not just top down, but really you're going to have to work with Democrats. That's acknowledged.
I'm not naive enough to believe that one Republican can go to Sacramento and change the world and save the state. But I do believe my real world experience and my perspective as a middle class family person can give a different tone and tenor to the conversation, and hopefully across the aisle open their eyes and minds and ears a little bit to what I talk about is the real world applicability of some of what they're doing. And people will say to me, like, aren't you going to be frustrated up there? What are you trying to accomplish when you get there? And I said, well, my first goal is to sit down and try to make the bad a little bit better. And it's incremental, but
it has to be.
Yeah, exactly.
Because when you're dealing from a minority position, as long as you can get their ear and say, hey, I did this. I not only ran a business, I had to deal with, you mentioned the environmental issues, the construction issues, the financial issues, the report. I mean, Matt, it's a lot to run a business here in the state of California.
Absolutely. And so many people, kind of are throwing up their hands and giving up on the state of California. And I can't do that. My family's here. My wife is a fifth generation native Californian, born in San Diego and raised in Sacramento. And we're here to stay. And I always tell people, like, you've got to make these incremental changes. You've got to make this commitment to the long-term view. And when I go up to Sacramento, I listen to people, and they'll say, even the Democrats want more Republicans up there because they've figured out that the far extremes that are controlling their party it isn't working.
We've seen that on a national level.
Exactly. And, so they may not tell it to you publicly, but there are Democrats in Sacramento that have had conversations with me that said, hey, we really hope you win because your opponent is not part of the solution, she's part of the problem.
Yeah, we try to stay away from that, but we will touch base on it in just a minute. Matt, your opponent is sort of out of the AOC wing of the Democratic Party, to be sort of kind right now.
There's two Democrats in the race, one Republican. I'm the only Republican right now, but it's a top two primary, so we're hopeful that we'll survive the June primary and move on to the general against one of the Democrats. But one of the candidates is somebody that I would describe as AOC married with children, far left progressive attorney, who I think outflanks to the left most Democrats in this district.
Oh, so she's like from the Elizabeth Warren wing of the Democratic Party.
Exactly. She has supported the mileage use tax in San Diego County, and that just doesn't play in a community, in a county that is a commuter society. I mean, the idea, mass transit is great if you live in an urban environment, but mass transit doesn't work in Orange County and San Diego County. And I always use the example, like, how do you talk to the family whose son is playing soccer in Chula Vista and whose daughter is playing volleyball in Ladera Ranch, and they're going to spend their weekend shuttling between two tournaments, and on top of all the other ridiculous gas taxes and excise taxes we pay and car registration we pay in California, on top of that, we want to charge you $4 or 4 cents a mile for every mile you drive your car.
That's insane.
It's insane, and it doesn't. Those uber wealthy, liberal elites might find it an inconvenience to write one more tax check, but average Joe American, that's a problem.
Oh, it's not just average Joe American. Even like your upper middle class. This state is rapidly approaching $6 a gallon gasoline. Folks, can you imagine tacking on 4 cents a mile? Okay, what? A car may get 30 miles a gallon. Okay, you're really stretching the limits now. And
exactly,
working class people, let's say people who have to commute into a specific, they may have to drive 20, 30 miles to get to work. Matt, 60 miles a day and you're taxing those people for,
exactly, and cost of living. We had a number of employees who drove 45 minutes to an hour to come to work at our businesses in South Mission Viejo. And if with additional taxes, or what I would call a commuter tax, we would have to raise their pay as well, which is just going to raise the cost of everything for everyone. So, it's just another business expense that is just ill-advised, if you ask me.
Folks, here you have someone giving practical solutions, good ideas, lived it, breathed it. Matt, how long did you have the business for before you sold it?
21 years. So we started with our Infiniti dealership, and then a couple, 3-4 years after that, we applied for and was awarded an open Audi point, and then eventually, based on our customer satisfaction numbers and our performance as an automobile dealer, Volvo Corporate came to us and said, we would like you to be our Volvo dealer in Mission Viejo. So that was the easiest one of the three to get.
But now you're doing something right. You have big manufacturers coming to you wanting to have you, represent them in South Orange County, and now you've been recruited to run for the state Senate seat. I tell you, folks, he's doing something right because he's being recruited all throughout his life. Let's talk about a couple other issues. Yep. We've talked about cost of living, high taxes. Crime is an issue. Homelessness is an issue. It's really acute in places like LA County. Tell us, you've seen deep blue cities around the country. Really big issue. They changed the bail laws, and it got really bad. Now, your district, how much of an issue is it there? Has it crept into that issue?
I think it's definitely creeping into particularly the homelessness from downtown San Diego up the beach coastline and from LA County down. Yeah. We're a little bit protected by it, but right here in Orange County. But the homelessness issue, we can't address it. Like I tell people, it's crazy to think we can solve the homelessness crisis by simply building more shelters without really addressing the mental health and addiction issues and the access to treatment for that. And, I'm a businessman, not a politician, so I don't know all the nuances of every issue, so there's a little bit of a learning curve there for me. But I know philosophically, as a pragmatic conservative, that we need to do something about in a compassionate manner to address those mental health and addiction issues that are plaguing at least 85% of our homeless population. Yeah. And you can build them a little shelter to live in, or build them a homeless park that they can put their tent in. That doesn't solve the problem.
It's almost like you're saying, Matt, the old biblical saying, teach a man to fish and he can feed himself, versus,
Exactly. I mean, in some of these other communities where they're building tiny houses for them to live in at $600,000 a house, they don't want to be there anyway, and they're not going to solve their problem. And whether it's addiction or whether it's mental health. And so I think we really have to direct our resources to those issues, and how do we care and treat.
Well, that's another issue on the national scene, folks. I mean, we've had problems at the border from Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, California, and a lot of drugs are coming across that border. We talk about it on the show all the time. Matt, if the federal government, I know they've got their hands full right now with what's obviously the news of the day every day now is the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We see it on cable networks 24/7. The president gave a speech earlier today, folks, about how there's no more Russian oil going to be coming into the United States. There's going to have to be a temporary effect on gas because of that. One thing you don't hear the administration talk about, though, there are a lot of drugs coming across that southern border. And being as we're in Southern California, some of those drugs are going to make it into these communities, particular community in the district that you're running for, because there is some decent income in this district, and people that have that income, they're going to spend it on some drugs.
So, it's crazy for us to believe that the border issue is all about immigration and not about the drug cartel and the amount of fentanyl that's coming up into Southern California, and putting all of our young people at risk. And when you look at Sacramento, and when they propose a law to criminalize the possession of fentanyl with intent to sell, and the Democrats vote against it, it's like the logic and hypocrisy, overflows. I mean, you can't have a public safety perspective without addressing some of your criminal penalties, and they're not doing it right now. I mean, our soft crime penalties are simply empowering criminals instead of punishing them. And our fentanyl traffic across the southern border here in California is a perfect example.
Wow, I tell you what, folks, again, you've got an opportunity here to have someone a pragmatist, who understands the issues of the day, who will really represent all people in that district. I mean, that's what I'm coming across from you. It's not a partisan type thing. You're a problem solver. You want to, make your voice heard, have dialogue with the Democrats, recognizing it is what it is. I mean, that's a good tribute, and that's something strong to run.
Well, thank you. And I've lived in California for 22 years, and I'll be very honest with you. When we came out here to build our Infinity store, I thought we would build it, get it up and running, flip it, and head back to the Midwest. And 22 years later, here I am, still committed to the state. And like I said, my wife's from here, so we have deep ties here regardless. But I do believe it's a little bit of the Midwestern sensibility in me. I grew up in a tiny town of 1,500 people, went to in a graduating class of 77 kids. And you all coexisted, and you cared about everybody, you knew everybody. And it's kind of that founding principle of compassion and constructive compassion. Everybody was still self-reliant. I mean, we want people to be self-reliant, but we care, and I think some people would say it's odd to find a Republican who cares. And I'm like, I think Republicans care deeply. We all care about the same things. It's just a disagreement about how we get there.
How to get to the end. Yeah, exactly. Man, we had a couple minutes left. Look, campaigns, they can't run on fumes, okay? All right, so you need to raise some dough for the campaign. Talk to our audience. For those people who want to go to his website, Matt, talk about that.
All right, it's pretty simple. MattGunderson.com is our website, or you can go with Gunderson.com. Both of them work. We are up against a targeted race in the eyes of the Democrats in Sacramento, that they want this seat to go from red to blue. And so obviously resources matter, Mark, and we would welcome any online donation that you can give. And when I wrap all of these conversations up, I'm always reminded of my very favorite quote, and it starts out, Ralph Waldo Emerson quote, that starts out, your purpose in life is not to be happy, it is to be useful. And I won't bore you with the whole quote, but that's kind of the driving force for me here, is that, I hope to be useful to the people of all of the people in the State Senate District number 38, and for that matter, the state of California, because we need to push this state back into some equilibrium of logic, good sense, and, recreate the California dream, because right now the California dream doesn't exist for a lot of people.
Well, Matt, based upon everything you've talked about here, if we can get Matt up in Sacramento, maybe that will move the legislature, which has shifted significantly left, maybe we can get it back a little center left, just to the left of center, given the makeup of the state of California. Matt, I got to tell you, it's been a pleasure having you on today. I can't tell you how happy I am to have met you.
Thank you, Mark.
And I want to wish you the best in the campaign.
Thank you very much.
Up.
Absolutely. Yeah. We're ready to roll. And I joke about it that having sold our businesses, I'm the unemployed candidate. And so this is my full-time job. And again, for all of the Republicans in the audience, I'm going to do my damnedest to keep this seat red.
Matt, thanks for joining us. Folks, a terrific day today, and we will have Matt back along the campaign trail as this race develops, and hopefully we can get California a little bit center-left, maybe getting into the middle's too optimistic, but at least center-left will be a nice little start there. Thanks for joining us today, folks. We'll be back tomorrow hitting all the topics. We're going to cut through the propaganda, and you're going to hear it straight for us here on the show. Stay safe. Have a good evening. We'll see you tomorrow.